I bought the house with every penny I saved my whole life, only to be banned by my daughter-in-law from even stepping inside on their housewarming night. She changed the locks, humiliated me online, and my own son said nothing, like I never gave birth to him. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch the next episodes, where every story will chill you with the truth. The morning light spilled like honey through the lace curtains of the old Victorian house on Linden Avenue. Soft rays filtered through specks of dust, dancing slowly in the quiet air. The house, wrapped in ivy and memory, had stood for nearly a century. Every corner of it held a voice, a draft line, a breath once shared. Martha Langley moved through the kitchen in silence. 71, upright and elegant, even in her solitude. She wore a blue wool cardigan her late husband once insisted made her eyes look like Lake Tahoe at dusk. Her hands thin but steady, prepared tea with the precision of ritual loose leaves, porcelain pot, just enough lemon. Only one teacup on the counter now. There had once been two every morning for over 40 years. One cracked from the handle, the other pristine, always his. Now both sat side by side on the shelf like sleeping birds. She chose neither. Just a simple cup, white, with no story. The kettle whistled gently and she moved to turn off the stove. Outside, a young couple jogged by with a stroller, the woman laughing, the man nudging her playfully. Martha watched them until they disappeared behind the flowering jacaranda trees. Her lips parted, not in a smile but something softer, like remembering how it used to feel to be necessary. She carried her tea to the front room, passing framed photographs lining the hallway. Jason's birth, her late husband in uniform, a ribbon-cutting ceremony in 1983 where she stood tall beside a courthouse she had designed from the foundation up. Martha had once been known across Marin County as the woman who built with grace, a pioneering architect in a time when the field didn't have room for soft voices or thoughtful curves. Her buildings weren't just strong, they breathed. Now the only thing breathing in the house was the wind through the old oak frame. The knock at the door startled her. She set the cup down without sipping. When she opened the door, Jason stood there with a lopsided grin. Her son, tall, handsome, a little leaner than he should have been. The man he'd grown into still carried something of the boy who once fell asleep on her shoulder in church pews. "Hey, Mom," he said, "can we come in?" Beside him stood Nicole. Polished, graceful high heels that clacked sharply on the porch tiles. Her smile was radiant, camera-ready, and entirely unreadable. Martha stepped aside. Of course. They entered the house like visitors, not family. Nicole's eyes scanned the living room, the mismatched chairs, the books stacked on the coffee table, the dust that had settled without apology. She didn't sit until Jason did. "We wanted to talk to you about something," Jason said, his fingers weaving and unweaving on his lap. "A dream, really." Nicole's tone slid in like velvet. "It's a project we've been working on, an idea really about building a life we can grow into." Jason glanced at her and then back at Martha. "There's this property up by Lake Sonoma. It's incredible. Light everywhere. It sits right on the edge of the lake, just glass and water and sky." Nicole nodded, her excitement artfully restrained. "It's modern but not cold. Sustainable materials, open plan, everything. We want to live somewhere that reflects who we are, who we're becoming. And you want me to buy it for you?" Martha's voice was soft but unblinking. "No," Jason said quickly. "Not like that. But we've pooled our savings. We're just short on the down payment. If we could just bridge that gap, we'd be able to make it happen." Nicole leaned forward. "It's not a favor. It's a legacy. We want this home to be where we raise your future grandchild. And frankly, you've always believed in investing in spaces that matter. This one matters to us." Martha looked at her son for a long time, not at his smile, but the way his shoulder tensed just before he spoke. She saw the hesitation in his throat. "How much is the gap?" she asked. Jason hesitated. Nicole didn't. $370,000. Silence settled across the room like falling ash. Martha's eyes didn't leave Nicole's. "That's not a gap. That's a chasm." Nicole's voice didn't lose its warmth. "It's an investment, Martha, and we'd handle everything. The property would be under our names, of course, for banking, mortgage, paperwork, escrow. But this would always be your home, too. Always." That word scraped something inside her, Jason said. It could be our way of reconnecting, a place to gather, somewhere beautiful and new. And it did sound beautiful. A new beginning, a gift. And hadn't she spent decades building homes for other people? Wasn't it time to build something for her own family? She didn't agree right away. But by the time the tea had cooled and the shadows in the living room had stretched long across the rug, she said she'd think about it. She slept poorly that night. The next day she called her lawyer. The paperwork was drawn. Martha sold the Victorian on Linden Avenue to a historic preservation trust. She added another $100,000 from her savings. Her lawyer read the transfer clause twice. You understand, he said, that gifting this means the house won't be in your name. You'll have no legal claim to the property. I understand. He looked at her a moment longer, then nodded. Martha signed. When she stepped out of the building, the wind tugged at her hair. She felt lighter and heavier at once. Jason met her for lunch that afternoon. He kissed her cheek. Nicole sent a thank you note printed on thick linen stock. They called it a fresh chapter, but the typeface on the deed felt cold. 2 weeks later, they took her to see the house. It was breathtaking. Walls of glass from floor to ceiling catching the sun like polished crystal. The lake mirrored every beam of light, giving the illusion that the entire house was floating on water. Every surface gleamed. Not a single curtain, not a single shadow. Nicole walked ahead, voice rising in delight. Can you believe it? The air just moves through you. Jason led Martha through the atrium, showing her where the living space would be the gallery wall, the nursery. She nodded. They showed her the guest suite. She smiled politely, but her feet moved slower. Her fingers brushed the glass warm with light, but not warmth. And in every reflection she saw herself refracted thinner, fainter still. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting the lake in gold. Jason wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We'll fill it with laughter, Mom. Holidays, birthdays. You'll love it here. She didn't answer. Just looked through the transparent walls at a future she wasn't sure would hold her. Later, as they drove her back to her temporary apartment near the marina, Martha turned once more to see the house behind her. The sun burned through the glass facade, making it glow like a lantern. It looked surreal, like a promise made in the wrong language. She didn't cry. She only watched. And in that quiet watching, something inside her gently rearranged itself. She had given them a house. She just didn't yet know what they would do with the door. It was a Wednesday when Martha first tried to visit the new house again. She had picked up a basket of Meyer lemons from the farmer's market that morning. A small, soft gift, the kind her mother used to bring neighbors. Something from her hands, something from the ground. She took her time driving through the winding road toward the lake. Each turn revealing more sky, more green, until the glass structure rose like a vision, quiet and detached among the trees. But something was different this time. The sleek gate at the front, ornamental steel with a minimal sensor panel, was closed. She slowed the car and rolled down her window, reaching out for the keypad. It beeped once, then a flat red light. Invalid code. She tried again, same result. She pressed the intercom button. No sound. No response. The sun hung low behind her. The air smelled of eucalyptus and ozone. Martha waited 5 minutes, then 10. Still nothing. She dialed Jason, straight to voicemail. A soft knot began to form just beneath her ribs. She pulled the basket onto her lap, smoothing the cloth she had draped over the lemons. The gesture suddenly felt old-fashioned, too gentle for glass walls and silence. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nicole. Hi, Martha. Just a heads up, we'd appreciate it if you let us know in advance next time you plan to drop by. Things are still being set up. Thanks for understanding. There was no greeting, no signature, no mention of the gate. Martha read it twice, and then again. She drove home in silence. The basket of lemons remained untouched on the passenger seat, bright and absurd under the late afternoon light. The next day she stopped by again, this time just to try. No answer, no sound. The house didn't even blink. Days passed. No call from Jason. No invitation. Only a polite distance, crafted, polished, deliberate. And then came the post. Martha wasn't tagged directly, at least not at first. A friend from the Preservation Society forwarded it to her, unsure whether to laugh or be alarmed. It was a Facebook post from Nicole, filled with soft-lit photos of the new house, captioned with words like, Boundaries, healthy distance, and learning to say no to toxic energy even when it shares your bloodline. In the comments, someone had asked, "Is this about your MIL?" Nicole replied with a heart emoji and the phrase, "We all grow up sometime." Martha stared at the screen for a long time. Her name wasn't in the post, but she was there folded into every passive-aggressive sentence, every filtered photo, every insinuation that she was the shadow behind their new glass life. She tried not to react. She tried not to think about who had read it, who had believed it, who had nodded silently in agreement. But whispers began to follow her like drafts through an old window. At the bookstore, a neighbor she had shared tea with for years avoided eye contact. At the co-op, someone paused just long enough after saying hello to let Martha feel the pause. Silence now carried weight. When she walked to the mailbox outside her apartment, she saw a message on the community bulletin board. Anonymous, handwritten. Even smart women can't fix broken roots. Her hands didn't shake when she tore it down, but they were cold when she folded it into her pocket. Later that week, she visited City Hall hoping to update her address on file. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with nails painted lavender, typed her name into the system. Langley Martha. Nothing at Lakeview address. No active residency on file. Martha blinked. There must be. I was part of the purchase. The woman frowned. Well, the deed lists Jason Langley and Nicole Langley as sole owners. Nothing under your name. Do you have a utility bill? I was told it would be a shared space. Martha said, the edges of her voice starting to fray. A family home. The clerk softened. That's not how it's filed. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scattered across the courthouse steps, swirling around Martha's feet as if pulled by something invisible. She stood still, staring at the ground, feeling the quiet crack of something beginning to give. It wasn't grief yet, just a draft. She called Jason again that night. Still no answer. No voicemail. Just the flat-tired ring and the inevitable beep. So she wrote an email instead. Jason, I know you're busy. I don't mean to intrude. I just need to understand. Do I still have a place in your life? In that home, I need to hear it from you. Here. She never got a reply. Instead, she began to notice the way her memories now came back in reverse. Not with warmth, but with warning. The dinner where Nicole suggested she modernize her wardrobe. The time Jason forgot her birthday and claimed it was too close to the holidays. The way they never actually said thank you, not for the house, not for the money, not for the years. The boundary had been drawn with silence, and silence was now being weaponized. One evening, Martha returned to the lake house, this time not to enter but just to look. She parked outside the gate again, far enough not to trigger any security alerts. From the distance, the house shimmered like a crystal fortress, its glass walls catching the last rays of sun. She got out of the car, walked slowly to the mailbox, an expensive steel structure mounted on a minimalist post, separate from the house itself, an architectural afterthought. And there inside the mailbox was a postcard, not for her, addressed to Jason and Nicole, a promotional card for an upcoming architectural expo in San Francisco. On the back, in careful calligraphy, were the words, "Stunning use of natural light, truly inspired design." Martha ran her fingers along the edge of the card. A single breath left her. She slipped it back in. She stepped away from the mailbox, and in the reflection of the glass walls across the road, she saw herself, not as a guest, not as a mother, not as a contributor, just a woman outside a house she had paid for, staring through walls that had been turned against her. The door wasn't just closed, it was sealed. It began as most betrayals do, with a flicker of familiarity on a screen. Martha wasn't planning to watch the local news that evening. It had become background noise lately, too much politics, not enough people. But as she was flipping through the channels while folding laundry, a headline caught her eye. Clearwater Vista, the future of sustainable living. The anchor smiled brightly as the segment rolled. A sleek video played drone footage over a shimmering lake, smooth transitions of light over glass facades, wide atriums brimming with filtered sun. Then came the voice. Nicole. Her daughter-in-law stood center stage in the frame, a microphone in one hand, pointing proudly to a rendering behind her. She was poised, magnetic, and completely in control. Martha's hands froze mid-fold. The image on the screen wasn't just a modern home. It was her home, her idea, her design. The structure behind Nicole, this so-called vision for the future, was a mirror of something Martha had drawn 30 years ago. The curve of the mezzanine, the interior courtyard with cascading trellis, even the louvered roofline angled to capture morning sun in winter and shielded in summer, it was all there. The only thing missing was her name. The segment ended with applause and a title card, Clearwater Vista, a Nicole Langley initiative. Martha turned off the TV. For a moment she sat completely still. Her heart didn't race. Her breath didn't quicken. It was a colder sensation, like something vital had been pulled out of her body without her knowing, and now there was just space where it used to be. She stood and walked to the hallway. The second drawer of her old drafting desk creaked as she opened it. Beneath the folded blue tracing paper, the rolls of vellum, and the graphite tools she hadn't used in years, she found what she was looking for. A leather-bound portfolio worn at the edges. She placed it on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were her original drawings done by hand before software, and renders, and three-dimensional walkthroughs. Designs she'd crafted in her late 30s when her fingers still knew how to breathe life into structures. A set she had shelved incomplete after her firm lost funding during the recession. She hadn't looked at them in over a decade. She laid the pages out one by one. The lines matched. The glass corridor with the vertical slats. The atrium with the sunken garden, the hidden water capture system under the deck. It wasn't inspired by her work. It was her work, and no one had asked. She pulled her reading glasses off, closed her eyes, and breathed. Then quietly she began gathering evidence. She scanned each sheet, marked the dates, and printed out side-by-side comparisons between her blueprints and screenshots of Nicole's presentation. She saved them to a USB drive and printed a second copy for backup. It was tedious, but she moved methodically like she had in the old days when a single measurement off by an inch meant structural failure. By midnight, her kitchen table had become a miniature war room. She stared at the paper and then passed it into the wall. There had to be someone who would listen. The next morning, she walked into the public library downtown. The building hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same stone columns, same smell of books and floor wax. She hadn't been inside since giving a guest lecture for the architecture department back in 2005. A younger librarian greeted her, then directed her to the periodicals section. She wandered past rows of magazines until she spotted a familiar face. Noah Rivera, once a student in her architecture seminar at Sonoma State, now editor for the regional culture desk at the Marin Chronicle. He was scribbling notes in a reporter's notebook, a pencil tucked behind one ear and earbuds in. She waited until he noticed her. "Professor Langley," he said, blinking. "Wow, it's been a long time." Martha nodded. "You still covering stories about buildings and the people inside them?" Noah smiled. "Yeah, though it's mostly arts and municipal funding these days. You still drawing?" "Not lately," she said, "but someone else is using my hands." She sat beside him and laid out a few documents. Noah studied the render comparisons, then her name on the original blueprints. His brows furrowed. This looks like theft. I'm not making accusations," she said. "Yet. I just need to know who might take something like this seriously." Noah leaned back. "I know a guy. Investigative. Freelance mostly. But he's good. He helped crack that elder abuse scandal at Fairway Manor 2 years ago." "What's his name?" "Raphael Dorsey." She wrote it down in her planner. "Would you vouch for me if I call?" "I'll do one better. I'll call him for you." Martha looked up. "Thank you." Noah smiled. "You once gave me a C on a final for misusing negative space." "And I was right," she said, almost smiling. They parted by the front steps. The wind caught her scarf as she walked away, brushing it against the library's tall glass windows. She paused for a second, catching her reflection. Her face framed by books behind her shadows around her collarbone, her eyes set forward. It wasn't a mournful face. It was a waiting one. That afternoon, she returned home and began sifting through boxes of her archived work. Lecture notes, slide decks, guest presentation rosters from conferences in San Diego, Portland, Vancouver, each with dates, records, timelines, proof. She knew this process, knew the burden of persuasion placed on the one who had been erased. She called Raphael the next morning. His voice was direct, deep, slightly impatient. But when she mentioned Noah's name, it softened. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop on Thursday. That night she laid the portfolio on her lap again. This time she didn't look at the pages. She just held it. The designs were hers, but more than that, so was the silence that followed, and she was done letting other people speak over it. The cafe was tucked between a thrift store and a dry cleaner off 5th Street, the kind of place that still played Coltrane through real speakers and didn't ask your name when you ordered a black coffee. Martha arrived 10 minutes early, sat near the window, and took out the folder she had prepared neatly clipped documents, side-by-side blueprints, and a printed email she had read over at least 20 times. She hadn't brought a notebook, only memory and conviction. The man who walked in exactly on time wore a navy wool coat and a tired kind of confidence. Raphael Dorsey looked younger on the internet, fewer lines around the eyes, less gray along the jaw, but in person he carried the weight of stories he'd had to write more than once. He spotted her, immediately walked over and extended a hand. Martha Langley. She rose and shook it. His grip was firm but not performative. "I appreciate you meeting me," she said. "Noah said you were worth listening to." He ordered an espresso, no sugar, and sat down across from her. His notepad came out quickly. It was already half filled. "All right," he said, clicking his pen. "Let's start with why you're here." Martha opened the folder. She didn't offer a preamble, just the facts, dates, design sheets, comparative visuals. Then the email from Nicole sent 2 months prior, which vaguely referenced modernizing and adapting one of Martha's legacy ideas for their own residential vision. "I never gave permission," she said. "Not to reference, reproduce, or market it under anyone's name but mine." Raphael scanned the documents. His brow tightened. "Have you copyrighted the design?" "Registered, yes. It was archived with the American Institute of Architects in 1996. My original firm kept a sealed backup for legacy recognition." He nodded slowly. "Which means if they're using it without attribution or license, they're open to claims, especially if there's commercial gain." "There's more," she said. She pulled out a second sheet, public promotional materials for Clearwater Vista. Raphael's eyes darted over the page. Sustainable luxury. Mid-century reverence meets contemporary transparency. He glanced up. That last phrase sounds lifted, directly. "It is," Martha said quietly. "I used it at a keynote in Portland, 2003. He leaned back slightly. "You're not just being erased," he said. "You're being recycled." The silence between them lasted long enough for a saxophone solo to fill it. "Have you approached them?" he asked. "I sent one email to Jason," she replied. No answer. "Nicole's been present, but in her own way. You have a personal connection to them." She hesitated. "He's my son." Raphael blinked. "And she, my daughter-in-law." For the first time his pen paused. "Jesus." The word came out not in judgment, but quiet sympathy. He picked it up again. "Okay. Tell me everything from the beginning." And so she did. She told him about the house on Linden Avenue, the promise, the paperwork, the gated silence, the post on Facebook, the name erased from the city's records, the mailbox that now held other people's dreams. He didn't interrupt except to ask for dates, spellings clarification, and when she was finished he said nothing for a long time, just sat back and looked at her. "You're not just a source," he said eventually. "You're the original." He gathered her pages together gently. "I need to verify everything, but I'll be honest, this story's more than a stolen blueprint. It's a systemic one, about inheritance, voice, and power, about how women over a certain age become invisible unless they burn down the room." "I don't want to burn anything down," Martha said. "Then we'll shine light through it." He stood. "You okay with your name being part of this? We can go anonymous for now." She didn't answer immediately. Then her eyes met his. "If I stay silent, I'm part of the theft." He nodded. "I'll call you in 3 days," he said. "Once I've verified the architectural filings. If this is what I think it is, we move forward." After he left, she remained at the table, untouched tea growing colder by the minute. Outside, cars passed. A girl with pink earbuds danced while waiting for the crosswalk. The world continued. Martha looked at the empty seat across from her. She hadn't just spoken for the first time. She had testified. The following day, Raphael called her again. He sounded sharper, this time focused. "I checked the AIA archive," he said. "The design's registered to you full rights. I also spoke to 2 attorneys who confirmed it's enforceable. You never signed over intellectual property. There's no co-credit, no transfer." He paused. "Nicole has a history. I pulled legal filings from San Jose County. 6 years ago, she was sued by an ex-colleague, someone in branding, claimed she plagiarized a full campaign for a wellness resort in Tahoe, and dropped before discovery. Rumor is her ex-husband convinced the plaintiff to pull it. There's no formal record of fault, but the pattern's there. Martha said nothing. It didn't surprise her, but it felt different hearing it from someone else's mouth. I'll need your written permission to move forward, Raphael continued. And if you're open to it, your voice. We're thinking radio too. She closed her eyes for a moment, then said yes. 3 hours later, she signed the consent forms. The story would go live pending legal review. That night, she sat by the window of her apartment and looked out over the city lights. In the reflection, she saw not just herself, but the edges of the woman she used to be, the architect, with too many drafts and not enough hours, the mother who stayed up late helping Jason build school projects from foam board and cardboard and glue. She had built homes for people she never met. Now she was reclaiming the one stolen in her name. Raphael sent her a voice memo the next morning. I've interviewed 3 independent architects. Every single one confirms the design language in Clearwater Vista isn't derivative, it's replication. Nicole didn't just borrow an idea. She lifted a signature. At the end of the recording, his voice shifted. You're not a victim, Martha. You're a living witness. She played the message twice. Not because she needed to hear it again, but because for the first time in weeks the words made her feel not alone. The article hadn't even gone public yet. It was just a flagged internal draft. Raphael submitted to his editor, titled plainly, "Did Nicole Langley plagiarize her mother-in-law's design?" But in offices where reputations meant everything and whispers could burn faster than flames, it didn't stay private for long. By the time the morning sun lit the mirrored windows of a downtown San Francisco PR firm, the questions had reached Nicole Langley's inbox. By 9:12 a.m., she had been summoned to the top-floor conference room, glass walls, no shade. 3 partners sat across from her. One of them slid a printed copy of Raphael's confidential memo across the table like a legal indictment. Nicole didn't blink. "This is misinformation," she said calmly. "We're dealing with an emotional party who's attempting to smear my name over a family disagreement." One of the partners cleared his throat. "Is it true that the design in question originated from your husband's mother? It was an old concept. My team evolved it." She offered a tight smile. "We're talking about sketches from decades ago, nothing proprietary." They exchanged glances. "You'll need to prepare a written defense," one of them said. "We can't have this narrative unaddressed, especially if it breaks nationally." Nicole nodded, left the room without showing panic, but by the time she reached the elevator, her jaw was clenched. She pulled out her phone, typed fast. "Nicole, your mom started a war. Deal with it." Jason saw the message while reviewing landscaping quotes for the lake house. He stepped outside and stared at it like it might change if he just blinked. Then he called his mother. The line rang 4 times before Martha answered, her voice even. "Jason." There was a pause before he said, "I think this has gone too far." Her silence was soft but taut. "She's getting questions at work. People are digging. And I'm just saying, Mom, maybe it doesn't have to be public." His use of mom landed like a thin thread trying to hold up a bridge. "I didn't make it public," Martha replied. "I gave the truth to someone who asked." Jason's voice faltered. "You know how much pressure she's under. I know how much of myself I gave away so you two could have that house. That wasn't Nicole's fault. We thought it was what you wanted." "What I wanted," Martha said slowly, "was to believe we were a family." There was silence. I'm asking you not to push this further." "Do you remember," she asked, "what it felt like when someone stood up for you, believed in you?" "I do. I was that person." Jason's voice went smaller. "Mom, that's not just a title," she said. "That's a promise, and I kept it." He didn't respond. The call ended. Later that afternoon at the public library, Martha sat alone at a familiar desk near the far window, her usual spot when she needed to think clearly. Sunlight filtered through dust-specked panes, washing the pages of her notebook in pale gold. She was marking articles when a figure stepped into the light. Nicole. She wore a cream coat, heels that didn't belong in a library, and an expression so carefully controlled it almost looked sincere. "I thought I might find you here," she said. Martha didn't look up. Nicole sat across from her without invitation. "You've made quite the splash," she said softly, eyes darting to the documents on the table. You should know it's still salvageable. Martha glanced up unmoved. Nicole folded her hands. If you retract your statement, we can close this chapter quietly. You keep your name out of this. I keep mine. Martha said nothing. Nicole's smile wavered. Otherwise, you'll lose everything. Your credibility, your dignity. They'll dig into your failures, your absence from the industry. They'll say you're just an angry old woman trying to punish her son. Still, Martha didn't speak. Nicole stood. Your silence will cost you more than your words ever could. Martha finally looked at her calm, clear-eyed. You're wrong, she said. It's my silence that cost me everything until now. Nicole's jaw tightened. She left without another word. That night, Martha received an email from Raphael. Subject echoes. Body women are writing in. Dozens already. Your stories unlocking others. I've attached some. You should see them. Martha opened the attachments. There were letters from retired teachers, engineers, copywriters. Women who'd designed tech interfaces only to be erased, women whose students had taken credit for lectures. Women pushed aside, then told to be quiet or grateful or gone. She read each one slowly, some twice. She printed them and began to organize them into a folder she labeled Echoes. The following morning, Raphael called. Nicole's firm knows something's coming, he said. They've asked for time to internally assess. I suspect they'll issue a non-statement by Friday. And Jason, Martha asked. Still quiet. Martha didn't respond. 3 days later, the story broke. The Glass Ceiling has a copyright Older Women's Stolen Work and the Fight for Recognition. Raphael's piece, now fully edited and fact-checked, landed on the front page of a major digital publication. It didn't just tell Martha's story. It told the story of 8 other women who had stepped forward in the days since. It named names, cited dates, showed blueprints, emails, contracts. It was surgical, devastating, and irrefutable. Within hours, it trended nationwide. Nicole's office went dark. Her email auto-response cited leave of absence. Clients began to publicly distance themselves from her campaigns. That night, Martha received another call. Jason. He didn't wait for her to pick up, just left a voicemail. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it was. I should have listened. I let her speak for me. I'm sorry. Martha listened to the message once, then again. Then she deleted it. No reply. Instead, she reached for her old sketchbook. She hadn't opened it in years. She flipped past empty pages, old graphite lines, half-built dreams. Then on a fresh page, she began drawing not blueprints, just form, just motion, just freedom. And for the first time in a long while, her hand didn't tremble. Something inside her had uncoiled. Not rage, not revenge. Clarity. It wasn't about a house anymore. It was about the space she'd let others fill with noise. Now she was reclaiming the silence and choosing what to build in it next. The title was short, almost poetic. Betrayed Architecture. Raphael's article ran on a Tuesday morning. By 9:07 a.m., it had over 30,000 shares. By noon, Martha Langley's name was trending on social media across 3 states. Nicole Langley's office didn't issue a denial. They issued silence, and the silence said everything. Clients started pulling out that same afternoon. A green tech developer in Seattle pulled their $1 million sustainability campaign. A wine consortium in Napa released a statement. We stand with the original visionaries of this country. By the end of the day, Nicole was placed on indefinite suspension. The internal HR email used careful words pending a full review, but everyone in the office knew what that meant. It wasn't just the plagiarism. It was the lie, the facade of poised charm, brilliance, and now cracked. Jason, meanwhile, had his own unraveling. Someone had noticed the irregularities in the transfer documents tied to the Sonoma property, the house with the glass wall. An internal audit in the lending bank flagged signatures and raised questions about forged disclosures. Within 48 hours, Jason's name was quietly removed from his firm's website. No official reason given. Just a polite call to take some time and reflect. He left the building that afternoon carrying a box of desk plants and unopened mail. And he didn't call his mom. Not yet. Nicole, on the other hand, went on offense. She called in a favor with a local podcast, one that focused on women in business, younger voices, the language of disruption. Her voice on the episode was silky deliberate. Older generations have a hard time letting go. That's understandable. But resentment doesn't equal theft. Sometimes the past confuses mentorship with martyrdom. The host laughed politely. Nicole continued. This narrative isn't about justice. It's about jealousy, and the idea that a younger woman can't build something better than what came before. That's the real sexism. By the time the episode aired, it had already been dissected by online journalists. One segment in particular drew backlash. In it, Nicole referred to Martha not by name, but as a once promising architect who faded away and found a stage again by pointing fingers. It backfired spectacularly, because within hours someone found the footage. It was grainy 1987, a local PBS documentary about women in architecture. The segment was titled Breaking Ground. In the video, a young Martha Langley stands in front of a half-built civic center. Wind catches her hair. Her voice is strong, unshaken. I don't want to be the only woman here. I want to be the first of many. The clip spread like fire. Architect forums reposted it. Women in STEM stitched it onto their pages. Educators used it in class. The younger generation Nicole claimed to represent began calling Martha a blueprint. Original Architect trended for the first time in history. Martha had no idea it had gone viral. She was in her kitchen when the first letter arrived on actual paper in a blue envelope. It was from a retired librarian in Albuquerque. I watched you speak in 1987. I watched you again today. Thank you for surviving long enough to be heard. Then came more. An email from a woman in Maine who'd been pushed out of an architectural firm in 2004. A letter from a 63-year-old drafter in Colorado who never got to design her own project but taught 200 students who did. Each message was different, but they all carried the same heartbeat. You weren't wrong, you were just early. Martha began printing them, organizing them. She placed them in the same folder as Raphael's article and the now infamous design blueprints. But something still tugged at her. There was more to say, more than quotes, more than articles. She pulled her old sketchbook from the drawer, not the design one, the other one. The one where she had once long ago scribbled thoughts during hospital nights and lonely lunches. Blank pages stared up at her like unopened doors. She picked up her pen. She didn't write about Nicole or Jason or the house. She wrote about the moment she first fell in love with steel beams. She wrote about the first time she sketched a dome with her daughter's fever breathing behind her. She wrote about holding silence like it was a job. She titled the first page, Silence is Not a Sin. It wouldn't be a memoir about revenge. It would be a ledger of truths, her own. The next morning, Raphael called her. You've seen the backlash, right? No, you're everywhere. That podcast Nicole did. It's imploding. People are mocking her. I don't care to gloat. I know, but it's justice, Martha. She was quiet for a moment. Then, justice isn't noise, it's presence. He nodded on the other end. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. He asked, What will you do next? I'm writing, she said. He smiled. That's the right kind of fight. Later that week, the mail carrier paused at her gate. You're that lady, he said, tapping his cap. I suppose I am. Good on you, he said, handing her 2 more handwritten letters. She took them gently. In one of them, a woman named Esther wrote, I worked in the same firm for 29 years. When I left, they deleted me from every blueprint, but not from memory. You brought me back. Martha folded the letter slowly with the kind of reverence usually reserved for cathedral ceilings. The town that once turned its back now watched her with different eyes, not with pity, not with scandal, but with something almost tender, recognition. Some even crossed the street to greet her now. And though she didn't forget the silence they once gave her, she accepted their presence for what it was, a beginning. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but motion. And motion was everything. The courthouse smelled like paper nerves and overused air conditioning. Martha had never been in a civil hearing before, not as a witness, not as anything. Yet here she was, seated across a room from the woman who had once kissed her cheek and called her mom, now flanked by lawyers in sleek black suits. Nicole Langley. She wore ivory, no wedding ring. She didn't look up as Martha entered, but her knuckles whitened around her pen. The room itself was modest. No jury, no grandstands. Just a judge, 2 legal benches, and the quiet scrutiny of recorders. A hearing, not a trial, but still everything about it felt like reckoning. Martha sat straight. Across the aisle, Jason walked in. Alone. No briefcase, no confidence. His eyes flickered toward Martha. But he didn't nod, just sat in the back row and stared at the floor. The judge reviewed the case outline aloud. A dispute regarding intellectual property, a contested architectural design, an older architect, a younger PR executive, and a design at the center of an emerging eco-resort in Sonoma. Then the name Martha Langley. Then another Nicole Langley. The syllables hung like a split mirror. Martha's testimony was first. Raphael sat in the gallery. His notepad was open, but he didn't write. He just listened, eyes locked on her every word. I created the design in question between 1982 and 1986, Martha said clearly. It was archived and protected. No license was issued. No rights transferred. The judge interrupted. And this design is the basis for the glass lake houses under the Langley Eco Project. Martha nodded. Identical in layout, curvature, even orientation. Nicole's attorney objected to the word identical, but the judge let it stand for the moment. Martha continued. I trusted my son and daughter-in-law. I gave them my savings. I believed in their future. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't foresee, was that my life's work would be used without credit, twisted for profit, and presented to the public under a name that wasn't mine. Her voice never cracked, but her hands trembled barely when she returned to her seat. Nicole's turn. She stood slowly, like she still had the upper hand. Your Honor, she began. This is a case of generational confusion. Murmurs rose. The judge silenced them. Nicole pressed on. The world is moving fast. New tools, new methods. What my husband and I built was inspired by many things, including old sketches his mother had left around, but inspiration is not theft. Martha narrowed her eyes. Nicole turned toward her finally and added, If we punished every daughter for innovating where her mother left off, we'd still be drawing with charcoal. Jason shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Then it came. Nicole's voice sharpened words laced with venom barely wrapped in civility. Let's be honest. This isn't about buildings. This is about a woman who watched time pass her by and couldn't stand watching another woman succeed where she failed. The silence in the room throbbed. Martha stood again uninvited. I didn't fail, she said, voice low and deliberate. I stepped back to raise the man who now looks at me like a stranger. Jason froze. I stepped aside because the world told me I had to choose. I chose family. I chose silence. And that silence was a currency you spent without asking. Nicole's face twitched, jaw clenched. Martha turned to the judge. Ask for the design overlays, line for line. Let them speak. The judge did. Within minutes, a clerk placed the original blueprint and the Langley project's renderings side by side. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Curves, angles, dimensions identical. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. Unless proven otherwise, it appears this work originates from Mrs. Martha Langley. Nicole's lawyers whispered furiously. And Nicole finally broke. Not with apology, with frustration, with fury. Her voice shook as she spat. You think legacy is built on sacrifice. No, it's built on visibility, on presence. You were invisible. Because I was made invisible. Martha fired back, and for the first time the air turned raw. Two women, two generations, two truths clashing like steel. Nicole sat back down. Her composure crumbled not from guilt, but from the realization that she was losing. Not just the case, the narrative, the control. The room no longer bent to her charm. Her words were no longer spellbinding. She had become noise. Jason stood up. For a moment it seemed he might say something, step toward his mother, break the weight of the years. But he didn't. He walked out. No words, no backward glance. Just the sound of footsteps and a door that didn't slam but shut hard enough to echo. The judge closed the session with formalities. Nothing was finalized yet, but it was clear where the scales leaned. Outside the courthouse steps gleamed under late afternoon sun. Reporters buzzed in the distance held at the base of the hill. Raphael met Martha at the top of the stairs. For once he didn't speak like a journalist. He spoke like a man who had seen something sacred survive fire. You just made glass talk, he said. Martha looked out at the city, at the buildings, at the light reflecting off windows she had once dreamed of designing. And for the first time in decades she saw her reflection not as a woman erased, but as one who had returned. There was a small community center 2 blocks from where Martha now lived. Nothing fancy, just beige walls, a sloped roof, and a line of shrubs someone had once tried to prune into animals but gave up halfway through. For months it had sat mostly empty save for Tai Chi on Tuesdays and bingo on alternate Sundays. Now it had a new sound. Graphite on vellum. Laughter. The quiet hum of measured creation. Martha had asked the center's director if she could host something. Nothing too formal. Just a free workshop once a week for older adults interested in design. The woman had blinked at her. Architecture for seniors. Martha had smiled. Why not? 12 chairs were set up that first Thursday. 17 people showed up. They weren't architects. Most weren't artists. They were retired clerks, teachers, one former mechanic, and a grandmother who admitted she mostly came for the tea but stayed for the angles. They learned how to draw straight lines without rulers, how to see shadows as structure, how to understand space not just as something to move through but something to shape. And they came back, week after week, because it wasn't just a class. It was permission. Permission to build again, to imagine, to reclaim a part of themselves lost to time and obligation. Martha stood at the front of the room, her voice steady, her hands inked with soft smudges. This week, she said, we sketched the homes we once dreamed of as children. No rules, just memory. That's when she noticed the girl. She couldn't have been more than 12. Long braids, a composition notebook clutched to her chest, sitting just outside the room watching through the glass. After class, Martha stepped into the hallway. Hello, she said gently. The girl hesitated. Are you Miss Langley? I am. My name's Eliza. I saw your poster. I'm not old, but I have a project for school. She thrust the notebook toward her like a peace offering. Inside were crude sketches. A slanted roof, big windows, too many doors. But there was something raw and beautiful in the imperfection. I want to enter the Future Home Challenge, Eliza said. But everyone else has computers and programs, and I don't. I just draw. Martha crouched beside her. That's the best place to start. Eliza's eyes widened. You'll help me? Martha nodded. The next day Eliza returned, and the day after that. They worked together in the far corner of the center by the tall glass window that faced the western sky. Martha showed her how to think in dimensions, how to understand light, how to balance space and silence. I like the idea of light coming from above, Eliza said one day, like hope dripping in. Martha smiled. Then make your ceiling generous. They sketched together in the long afternoon sunlight cutting across the table, their shadows folding into one. It wasn't just about architecture anymore. It was about inheritance, not of property, of spirit. Meanwhile, the world continued to knock. Martha began receiving interview requests. From journalists, radio stations, even an architecture magazine that had once refused to print her work back in the 90s. One request came with the bold headline, The Woman Who Rose from Betrayal. Martha declined them all. When asked why, she simply said, I didn't rise. I stayed. There's a difference. One afternoon, Raphael stopped by the community center. He leaned against the doorframe, watching Eliza measure walls on her model. She's good, he said. She listens. You know you've become a symbol, right? I'm not interested in being symbolic. He raised an eyebrow. Then what are you interested in? She looked at the girl, then at the older women laughing over graphite lines. Continuity. Raphael scribbled something in his notebook and left. That night, after everyone had gone and the room was quiet again, Martha sat alone at her desk. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the window into a mirror. Her reflection looked older now, yes, but also more complete. She gathered her things, prepared to leave, when she noticed the envelope. It had been slid under the door. No name on the outside. Just a single line of handwriting inside, scrawled in neat blue ink. I am Nicole's daughter. I think I might be yours too. Can we meet? Martha sat down slowly. Her hand trembled not with fear, with memory, with the weight of what had been broken and what might still be made whole. She folded the letter once, then again. Outside, the glass walls of the center reflected only the night, but behind them inside light still glowed. Not bright, not grand, but steady. The library was nearly empty that morning. Rain tapped gently against the arched windows, a soft percussion that made the silence feel sacred. Martha walked with steady steps, one hand in the pocket of her long gray coat, the other holding the letter. She had reread it a dozen times. I am Nicole's daughter. I think I might be yours too. Can we meet? She passed the rows of worn fiction, the quiet hum of the computers, and found her way to the children's corner where she used to take Jason when he was Eliza's age. And there she was, a girl no older than 10 or 11, dark curls, a patch sewn onto her backpack that read, "Make space for kindness." She looked up from her sketchbook and offered a smile that was cautious, but not afraid. "Are you Martha?" "I am Martha," replied, voice steady but breath held. The girl nodded toward the bench beside her. They sat together in silence for a moment before the girl spoke. "My name's Ivy," Martha nodded. "That's a beautiful name." "I picked it myself," Ivy said. "Mom calls me something else, but I like this one better. Ivy climbs and holds on." Martha swallowed gently. "I didn't know I had a granddaughter." "She didn't want me to meet you," Ivy said. "Said bad things. But I've heard your name in places she didn't know I could hear." Then came the line Martha would carry in her heart for the rest of her life. "I heard my mother yell, but I listened when you taught." Martha didn't cry, not this time. She simply opened her arms and Ivy leaned into them. Two strangers bound by blood, silence, and survival. Later that afternoon, Martha returned home. On her porch sat a small cardboard box. No note, just her name written in Jason's handwriting. Inside, old photographs. One showed Jason as a baby in her arms. Another, their wedding photo. No letter, no explanation. She stared at the photo for a long time. Her own younger face. Her husband's smile. Jason between them, squirming in his tiny suit. She held it against her chest. Then she took it with her, out to the lake. The same lake where the glass house stood, the house she helped pay for, but was never allowed to enter. The house was quiet now, the reflection of its smooth windows broken only by the ripples on the surface of the water. She stood by the edge, lit a match, watched the photo curl and blacken. The flames danced, then fell to ash. She cupped her hand and let the ashes scatter into the lake. They swirled, dissolved, disappeared. Not with anger, with release. Across town, Eliza was pacing nervously in the school auditorium. Judges walked between tables, inspecting models made of foam and paper and wire. Her model sat quietly at the end of the row. A simple structure, graceful, unpretentious. Open beams, skylights. A tiny note pinned beside it, the house without locked doors. When the results were announced, she didn't react right away. First place. Her eyes widened. She looked around searching, then saw Martha in the back row, clapping slowly with a proud smile. Later, when the crowds had cleared, Eliza ran up to her. "I didn't think I'd win." "You didn't win," Martha said, brushing a curl behind Eliza's ear. "You reminded them what matters." They stood together in the quiet hum of a new chapter. Weeks passed. Martha returned to the community center, resumed her classes. The room was fuller now. Word had spread. Seniors brought neighbors. Some brought grandchildren. Eliza sometimes helped teach the younger ones. Ivy came too, always sketching quietly at the corner table. One Thursday the mayor showed up, with a film crew. They were there to present Martha with a framed certificate, in recognition of decades of contribution to civic architecture and for restoring voice to a generation of silence. The applause was real. So were the tears on faces lined with time. But Martha, standing there beneath the plaque, said something that wasn't on any teleprompter. "I wasn't lost. I was just overlooked. And now I'm not." That night she returned home to find another letter slipped under her door. No envelope this time, just folded paper. "Ivy told me she met you. I'm not ready for more, but I'm not going to stop her anymore. Don't make her choose. Please." No name. But she knew the handwriting. Martha didn't respond. She didn't need to, because Ivy came again the next week. And the week after, and one day she stayed behind after class. "I was thinking," Ivy said, holding up a messy drawing of a treehouse. "Maybe we could build something together." Martha smiled. "What do you want to build?" Ivy thought for a moment, then grinned. "A place for people who lost their place." Martha touched the sketch and nodded. "Yes," she said, "let's start there." Langley House began not with a blueprint, but with a letter. A check arrived, quiet, unimpressive, folded between legal papers that smelled of toner and dust. It was the court-ordered restitution. Not much, at least, not compared to what had been taken. But to Martha it was a beginning. She didn't deposit it right away. She placed it on her desk beside Ivy's treehouse sketch and Eliza's winning model, and every morning she looked at it, asking herself the same question. What if the place they tried to erase became the place we reclaimed. That question became a mission. Within weeks, the plan emerged to build a resource center for elderly individuals who had been silenced, stolen from, or shut out. Langley House, not named for prestige, named for survival. It started modestly. A few calls, a few favors. Raphael helped connect her with nonprofit boards. Eliza's school rallied to support. Ivy handed out flyers at her community center like they were golden tickets. And then something unexpected happened. The glass house, the same one Nicole and Jason once lived in, the one Martha helped pay for, had gone into foreclosure. After Jason vanished and Nicole faced fines and lawsuits, no one had maintained the property. The bank seized it, left it empty. It sat on the market, its windows slowly fogging with time, its sharp modernism softening under the weight of neglect. Martha didn't want it, but others did. A group of older adults, some from her architecture class. Others who had followed her story in the media pooled their savings. They spoke to a foundation. They lobbied the county. One morning, Raphael showed up at Martha's door holding a manila folder. "You're going to want to see this." Inside a deed. The property had been bought at auction and donated to her. No strings, just one line handwritten in the margin, "Because you kept standing." Martha visited the house the next day. She hadn't been inside since Nicole changed the locks. The glass was still intact, but the light had changed. It no longer felt sterile, no longer cold. It felt unfinished, waiting. Within months, Langley House opened its doors. Not just a legal aid center. It became something more. A place where the stories of betrayal were met with advocacy, where silence was replaced with restoration. Workshops, counseling, legal navigation, a hotline, a coffee pot that was never empty. The media came again, but this time not for scandal. They came to honor. One headline read, "From the Glass House to the People's House, Martha Langley's second act." Martha wore no special outfit for the grand opening, just her usual sweater, a pendant her husband once gave her, and shoes that had seen decades of classrooms, courthouses, and community halls. Ivy stood beside her, holding one hand. Eliza stood on her other side, cradling the original House Without Locked Doors model like a relic. Reporters asked questions, lights flashed. "Why did you do this?" Martha smiled softly. "I didn't build this place to fight what was done to me. I built it so that others wouldn't have to fight alone." Behind her, the house gleamed. Light poured in from every side, casting reflections on the walls, but this time they didn't just reflect the present. They reached into the past. Inside a hallway featured framed letters from people around the country who'd written to Martha after the articles, the interviews, the verdicts. Each letter bore a name, each name a person who had once been told they didn't matter. Now their stories lined the walls. Martha began mentoring again. Architecture students from Berkeley and Stanford applied to intern at Langley House. They brought blueprints, models, and energy. But Martha gave them something they couldn't find in textbooks. She gave them stories about choices that lasted decades, about lines drawn not on paper, but in trust, about how every structure begins with intention and how those intentions, once ignored, can collapse everything. Eliza led workshops for teens. Ivy helped catalog the growing resource library. And every evening when the building emptied out and the noise faded, Martha would walk through the corridors, fingers brushing the walls. She no longer flinched at her reflection, because the glass no longer trapped her. It held her. One afternoon, Ivy pulled her aside. "I've been thinking," she said. "You gave me something when I didn't even know I needed it." Martha smiled. "You gave me something too." They looked up together as the sun began to set. The building's west-facing wall was all glass. As the light shifted, 3 shadows stretched across the floor. Ivy's, Eliza's, and Martha's 3 women, 3 generations bound not by blood alone, but by healing. Outside, the world continued, but inside Langley House, legacy lived. Not in monuments, in people, and in the choice to build again. There are voices we carry inside us long after they stop speaking. Martha's voice was one of them. It came now not out loud, but quietly, like the creak of old wood under sunlight, like the whisper of graphite across paper. Some say architecture is about shaping the world she once wrote, but I believe it's how we learn to rebuild ourselves. Her words didn't need amplification. They resonated where it mattered. Inside Langley House, the day moved slowly but full. The drawing class had grown from 5 to 12 participants. Most were women in their 70s, some in their 80s, one in her 90s, who refused to use a ruler because, as she said, "My wrinkles are more honest than a straight line." Each woman drew her home, not the one she lived in, but the one she dreamed of. One sketched a greenhouse wrapped around a kitchen. Another drew a circular library with a fountain in the center. And one, Martha noticed with a smile, had drawn a room filled with mirrors that didn't reflect, but refracted, scattered the light into new shapes. Outside the glass wall, a couple in their late 60s, clinging to each other like it was the first and last time, stood facing the lake. Their hands, gnarled and gentle, were pressed against the surface, absorbing the warmth. A small girl darted past the window, barefoot hair flying like wind-struck petals. She squealed something about sunlight corridors as she ran echoing off the glass and into the bones of the building. Martha watched all of it from her table. She had no need to intervene. Langley House was alive, breathing without permission, healing without demand. A package arrived later that afternoon. Eliza brought it into her office, eyes gleaming. "It's from Raphael," she said. The book inside was wrapped in craft paper and tied with linen string. Martha opened it slowly, like it might hum beneath her fingers. The title struck her in the chest like a wind that knew her name, The Mother on the Glass Wall, by Raphael Dorsey. She didn't need to flip through it to know what it held, but she did anyway. Photographs, letters, her old blueprints, transcripts from her trial, her rebuttals, Ivy's sketches, a double-spread portrait of Langley House as it stood now, 3 figures silhouetted in the glow of the setting sun. On the inside cover, Raphael had handwritten a message: "For the woman who taught the world that damage doesn't diminish light, it multiplies it." She closed the book. It was too much, too full, too earned, but not asked for. Martha didn't weep, not because she couldn't, but because the ache had finally softened. The weight she'd carried had been passed on not as burden, but as blueprint. She spent the rest of the day walking the halls, trailing her fingers across the clean lines of the walls, listening to laughter bubble up from the community room and smelling cinnamon from someone's afternoon baking class. As evening approached, she returned to her desk. The sun had begun to lower, painting the sky in the kind of colors only old women believed in: soft mauves, relentless gold colors with names that sounded like lullabies. She opened her leather notebook. It was nearly full now. Years of thoughts, sketches, quotes she collected from others, and ones she accidentally whispered in the middle of the night. Tonight she wrote one more. "The glass doesn't reflect me anymore. It reflects what came through me." She sat back. The notebook stayed open. The last page remained unwritten, not for lack of ideas, but out of respect. Some endings don't belong on paper. They belong in air, in laughter, in a 12-year-old's wild footfalls echoing through a building that once shut her grandmother out. Outside, the sun hit the glass one last time before dipping beyond the hills. And in that exact moment, it wasn't Martha's face that reflected back. It was every woman who had ever been told she didn't belong. It was a gallery of resistance made of light. It was legacy not as history, but as ongoing action. Langley House stood tall and transparent, but no longer fragile, and Martha, surrounded by stories made solid, sat in the heart of it, still, but never silent,